Oh, you want to go all the way back to the
If you
beginning?
don't mind.
That's a very... You want me to start from the beginning? Well, the beginning goes a long way back. I'm very old, you know. So, if you're going to start from the beginning, I hope you have the time to sit with me for a while.
Let's do that.
All right. So we have to go all the way back to Singapore when I was 6 years old. And that's the time that I started piano lessons, only because whatever my sister did, I also had to do. And my parents at that time thought it would be too much for me to be starting school and starting piano lessons at the same time. So they did not let me start piano lessons, and I blackmailed them by not going to school until they promised me that I would have piano lessons. So I got my piano lessons because they also wanted me to be educated so that I could learn to read and write, you know. So that's how it began. It's only because my sister was learning piano. I mean, in those days, you didn't have much choice in Singapore, you know. Yeah. And then I did not have a very inspiring teacher or a creative teacher. So I got bored very quickly, and it was all very pedantic. And after a while, I really hated it. But I had made such a fuss about starting, I didn't dare stop. So I stuck with it, and then we changed teachers, and then I liked it better. And by the time I was 10 years old, I was really involved. Yeah. By the time I was 10 years old, in the meantime, I had also started ballet lessons. By the time I was 10, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to be a ballerina or a concert pianist. It's very funny because now I'm a concert toy pianist. Life works in mysterious ways. When I was 14 years old, a professor from Juilliard was touring in the Far East, and I played in his master class, and he said to me, when you finish school, you should seriously consider coming to Juilliard, the famous music school in New York. So when I was 16, I did. I went to New York all by myself. All by myself in New York in the 1960s, which was a much more dangerous place than it is now. And I just showed up at the professor's doorstep and said, here I am, come to audition for Juilliard. And I auditioned and I got in. Yeah, otherwise I would have, I don't know, gone home. No, I wouldn't have gone home. I would have gone to London and studied there. But I got into Juilliard, and then I became the first woman to graduate with a doctorate from Juilliard in 1971, long before you were born, in 1971.
Not that long. I was born in 72.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, yes, I graduated from Juilliard in 1971, and I was the first woman to get a doctorate. So, that is the first chapter of my life. Or second chapter, rather. First chapter is childhood, second chapter is education. Third chapter is being thrust out into the great big world. And what do pianists do when they are thrust out into the great big world? They play a few concerts, they teach. Nothing terribly earth-shaking, okay? And then I got very restless being a classical pianist. To me, somehow, it wasn't quite enough to be playing the same repertoire that all other pianists, classical pianists would play, because, you know, if you play, say, the Chopin G minor ballade, everybody knows how it goes. And honestly, how many different interpretations are there, really, you know? So I decided I was going to do something very different with my life. I was going to go to the dogs. I decided I was going to change careers and I was going to become a trainer of dogs for the handicapped. So I joined an organization that was training dogs for the deaf. I thought that would be very good since I'm a hearing person. I could, help deaf people by training dogs that would help them with certain activities. After 1 year or so, the organization was not so professional and it folded. That was it. So I was back to being a pianist again at that point. And I still had a couple of concerts left over that I had still to complete. One was a tour in the Far East where I decided if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make the program more unusual. Because when I was training dogs, I was listening to a lot of ethnic music. And at that time, the word ethnomusicology, or world music was really not even in use yet, world music. Ethnomusicology, yes, as a musical science, but not world music. But I started getting very interested in music of other cultures. And then I became very fascinated with the impact that Asian cultures, Asian philosophy, Asian music had on Western composers. So I decided to put together this program of music by Western composers who had been influenced by Asian aesthetics and Asian cultures, So I started with Debussy, and of course, John Cage had to be in there. And I started learning his prepared piano music. That's how it all began. And then I had a friend who was visiting me from Malaysia, a dancer, and she spontaneously started moving and choreographing to this prepared piano music of Cage, which is really very exotic sounding and very gamelan-like, sounding very much like the percussion orchestra of Indonesia, of Southeast Asia. And so I thought, after we had several pieces developed, I thought, now John Cage needs to see our song and dance act. Yeah. And I didn't know how famous he was, and I would never have dared to call him up if I had known. So this was a classic case of fools rushing in where angels fear to tread. I looked him up in the phone book. You could do that in those days, Does anybody remember what a phone book is? Well, it's very big. I used to sit on it when I was little to reach the keyboard. So I looked him up in the phone book and I called him up, just like that. And he was very surprised to hear from me. And he said, well, I'm leaving for Europe, in a few days. So that was that, end of discussion. But I'm very persistent when I feel I really have something, when I'm convinced about something, So when he came back, I called him up again. And he really wanted to get rid of me. He was not very nice to me. He said, I don't remember anything from before I went away. And besides, I don't want to see something in somebody's living room. Whoa, was that a put down or what? So that was the end of the discussion. And even I knew that was the end of the discussion. But you see, I believe there is such a thing as fate and destiny, and everything is a matter of timing. So I'm riding the Broadway bus, a few weeks later, and I meet the Dean of Juilliard, whom I haven't seen in a long time because I'm graduated now. And he tells me he's going to Bali. I said, oh, I have a very good friend in Bali, an architect friend, and he will show you around and give you the royal treatment, and you will get a wonderful perspective on Bali. So I introduced Mr. Lim to the Dean, Waldrop, and when the Dean came back, he was ecstatic. He contacted me and told me, I had the most marvelous time in Bali. I can't thank you enough, for introducing me to Mr. Lim. If there's anything I can do for you, Margaret, don't hesitate to ask. Now, if that isn't an opener, what is? So of course, I asked the dean for a rehearsal studio so I could show John Cage some work. And lo and behold, what did he give us? He gave us the 1,000-seat Juilliard Theatre. So I go back and I call John Cage up again. And this time he had no more excuses. So we arranged to meet on the 21st of July, 1981, outside Juilliard. And we went in, and this one solitary figure in this 1,000-seat auditorium. And Marion de Cruz and I performed for him. And he loved what we did. He really did. He was very, very spontaneously enthusiastic. He even dedicated the score of Bacchanal to me. Originally dedicated to Sybilla Ford, the dancer. Now he rededicates it also to me, next to her name. Yeah. And a week later, we received a beautiful thank you note from him, which is a mesostic. A mesostic is a kind of poem that John Cage was very fond of writing. A mesostic is a poem where the subject of the poem forms the spine of the poem and the text goes across. So there were our names down the middle in capital letters and the poem across. And it was a lovely poem which expressed his delight in seeing us, and also mentioning that he had very circumscribed tastes in dance, and that he was surprised to find himself enjoying these dances. Now, if I had known all that, I would never have called him up. So it's better to be ignorant. And it ended with, and these Oriental artists gave me no trouble at all. The next year was John Cage's 70th birthday, and there was a big 12-hour marathon wall-to-wall celebration at Symphony Space in New York. So this was 1982. And one morning I got a phone call from the director of Symphony Space. He says, John Cage is sitting right here. He would like you to open the wall-to-wall Symphony Space birthday celebration with him. So I landed up playing several of his prepared piano pieces, and while I changed the preparations between pieces, he read from his writings. So that's how we spent the first half hour. And from then on, it's history. Yes. I knew John Cage for a total of 11 years. 11 years until his death in 1992. You know, by then, in his last years, John Cage had assumed this kind of almost saintly kind of aura, and people just respected him so much. And yet, he was both very, how can I say, a very spiritual man, but also a very down-to-earth man, both, if you can imagine that combination. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I knew that I was having a very privileged experience during this time. I was aware of it. But yet, at the same time, it was so rewarding in just a normal, practical sense. John Cage would ride the subway. He would come to my house because he didn't have a piano anymore. He would come to my house, take the subway there, which he enjoyed doing, you know, and spend time with me at my piano, working together. Many times we did this. And then he wrote a big work for me, which I went to discuss with him the day before he had his massive stroke. And then he died, and that was it. 3 weeks short of his 80th birthday. Everything that I do post-Cage has its source in Cage. Everything, including the toy piano. Why? Because John Cage was a prophet. He really foresaw and predicted things that would happen in the future decades before they happened. Whether it be minimalism, because he was already John Cage was already writing in the minimalist style some works in the 1940s. He was, and he really, without him, there wouldn't be fluxus, there wouldn't be sound art, there wouldn't be installation art, there wouldn't be sound poetry. John Cage is the father of our late 20th century Western culture. And with the toy piano, also, it's the same thing. In 1948, he wrote a little suite for toy piano. And on the first anniversary of his death in 1993, Lincoln Center asked me to do a tribute to John Cage. So I wanted to play a program that would show John Cage in all his variety just through his piano music, which is music for piano, prepared piano, string piano where you pluck the strings, bowed piano where you bow the strings, and toy piano. And so I learned his suite for toy piano at that time. And it was just 9 white notes, 9 consecutive white notes. Oh, but the creativity behind those white notes, so beautiful, so inventive, and so difficult. Oh, he made really very, very charming piece, but it is deceptively simple because the rhythms, the double notes, the technical involvement was not easy. I had to practice it as seriously as I would practice any piece of music. And at the end of it all, I realized that the toy piano could be a real instrument. And that's how it began. Dragon Ladies Don't Weep is dedicated to the memory of John Cage and my mother. As I said, John Cage could see things that other people had no idea about till much later. Way back in 1988 or thereabouts, late 80s, John Cage told Goethe Sultan, who was a very old lady at that time and a pianist colleague of his, Goethe Sultan then told me that John Cage said, "Margaret is a very good actress." And of course, I didn't understand what he meant at that time. And it's taken me a good half century to find out what he meant. Because his work already opened the door for me to discover more and more that music is not just music, but it is also theater. John Cage's, one of his favorite equations was art equals life equals theater. That was one of John Cage's very strong convictions. And then after meeting George Crumb, whose music is so full of inherent drama, where the pianist has to be more than just a pianist, you have to be a vocalist, percussionist, harpist, and somewhat of an actor. So all this was really taking me more and more deeply into the direction of theater. And with Dragon Ladies Don't Weep, it is a milestone that confirms my entrance as a fully fledged theater artist. And now I am in Lisbon, working on yet another theater piece, another musical theater piece, because Dragon Ladies Don't Weep is also a musical, because Dragon Ladies is also a music theater piece. It's a sonic portrait of me. So, Yeah, it's also a music theater piece. J-CHOES is a completely different experience because in Dragon Ladies Don't Weep, I am the solo performer. It's a one-woman show. And J-CHOES, I collaborate and interact with both Joana Gama and Ingo Ahmels. Yeah. I get to channel John Cage. Joana Gama gets to channel Hans Otter, John Cage's friend and colleague. And Ingo Ahmels gets to be Erik Satie. He looks the living image of Erik Satie. When you see the show, you will agree. It has been so much fun. Yeah. And it's a real tribute to these three figures who was, Satie really was the father of both Cage and Otter. You know, he was really a very important influence, the source for a lot of Cage's thinking. As Cage said, Satie was indispensable. Yeah, and then from Cage, I am just continuing the lineage down beyond. Through Cage, to me and the next generation, we are all the spiritual children and grandchildren of John Cage, whether we realize it or not. He has touched all our lives, and we would not be doing what we are now doing if it were not for John Cage, whether we know it or not. The funny thing is, when you are so involved in what you are doing, or rather what you are doing takes up so much of your energy, you don't really think very much of the perspective of the outside world looking in on you and how they feel about you. I mean, it's very nice to get compliments and good press reviews and being invited to play my toy piano at big festivals all over the world, and even playing my toy piano in Beethoven's house in Bonn, playing Beethoven on toy piano in Beethoven's house. I mean, can you imagine? Or playing toy piano in Carnegie Hall. I mean, it's so ridiculous when you think about it. But the world is now a very different world than when I first started out, 50 years ago. So today anything is possible. And why? Because people like Cage and Marcel Duchamp and Satie have made the world a much more open place, that anything we do now is possible. It's because of these very, very seminal figures that I have been talking about. And I feel greatly, greatly privileged to be able to have this legacy behind me that I can dip into and make my own legacy beyond it. Because the toy piano will be my legacy. The toy piano is alive and well. It will continue after I am gone. Follow your instincts. Do not be afraid. And don't mind what other people say. Follow the strength of your convictions. And whatever other people try to discourage you, no. Then you will truly be yourself. And you can only express your art if you are truly yourself and are 100% convinced of what you are doing. So don't let anybody deter you or distract you or discourage you from what your heart and soul wants to do.
Margaret, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.